Olá, internautas! Eu sou o Rafael Hernandes, repórter de tecnologia da Folha. Hoje eu converso com Sally Lehrman. Ela é a líder do projeto Trust Project, que é um consórcio de empresas de mídia no mundo todo, do qual a Folha faz parte, que tenta lidar com o problema da desconfiança nas empresas de notícias no mundo todo. Esse vídeo faz parte da série de comemoração do centenário da Folha de São Paulo. What exactly is trust regarding the media, and why is it important?
Well, that's a great question because we've thought a lot about that, and we talk a lot about it in the news media about why it's so important, but I don't know what we think enough about what we mean. And what I mean and what we mean in the Trust Project is the willingness of the public to trust that we as journalists are out there representing their interests, seeking accurate information, telling impartially the whole story so that they can make their own decisions. So it's trust that we will be impartial, that we will represent their interests, that we are really there to serve the public. And I think sometimes when I first started the Trust Project, people would say, well, shouldn't it really be the Truth Project? Well, no, because what we're doing as journalists is we seek truth, but we're not saying my truth is better than your truth is better than his truth. It's about bringing together information so that people can make decisions for themselves.
I see. And would you mind providing us with general status on trust in the media worldwide? Trust in the media and disinformation. Where do we stand worldwide? And if you could provide us with some information, particularly about Brazil as well.
Journalism is based on trust. So we're founded on the trust that people give to us, that we will tell their story. We will tell the story of all of society, of Brazil and elsewhere. And in order for society to function well, we need people to trust journalism because everyone needs to have a common source of information that we agree on. So we may disagree on how we address problems in society, but we have to agree on what the problems are and what are the components of those problems and who lives here and what are our concerns. So that's why trust in journalism is so central to not just what we do in our survival as an industry, but of course, the survival of the very society in which we operate. Now, where is trust overall? Well, trust has improved generally, but it is on shaky ground. So and what I would say is it's gone back and forth in the past year. So what we've seen, I looked at the Edelman Trust Barometer. This is a big firm that's in kind of public relations and marketing, and they evaluate the trust in a lot of different kinds of institutions, and they've been doing this for quite some time. And they found that they did a study in spring, and they found that trust in news had bumped up considerably by 7 points, and about 60 to 65% felt that news media were doing a good job covering the pandemic and helping people understand what they could do to protect themselves. So what we saw was we got a boost because people were concerned about what's happening to us and what could be done about it. Then in the fall, Edelman did another survey, and they said that trust in news had come to its lowest in some time. So it had reached a new low. And so what was happening, the US election, kind of a big push of misinformation around that time, and as a result we saw trust plummet. So what's happening with trust right now is that I think we have a big opportunity to help it grow, and we also have some risk that there is so much misinformation, disinformation out there, and accompanying anxiety around that people are losing trust in all kinds of institutions, not just journalism. And at that time, they said 59% of people said journalists were trying to deceive the public. or we're loyal to political ideology. So that's what we're up against. Around the world, we're seeing this kind of this back and forth increase and decrease. And so we need to use that as an opportunity to build better confidence in who we are as journalists, why we serve the public, and how we do it.
See, and you mentioned political actors. What role does, first of all, trust in other institutions? You mentioned a little bit about that. General trust in political institutions, and also the political discourse we have. Does it contribute to some kind of antipathy towards media?
Well, yes, of course. So you're pointing to what we see quite commonly now, which is politicians pointing to the news media, and if they don't like something, calling it fake news. And so that's become a bit of a trope or an outcry that we see regularly, and even the public has picked that up. So because politicians, our leaders and politicians become role models, if you will, and so people see them doing that, and they do it as well. And what happens, on the one hand, energize people who are angry angry and upset for whatever reason, and then they can target that angry at the media if they feel that it's not telling their story or their point of view. So what happens is people have an honest desire to try to know what's going on in the world and understand their community and understand both people like them and not like them, but they've been told that news is fake, and they've been told that there's a lot of fake news out there. On the one hand, many have lost confidence in their own ability to tell the difference, and they're fearful of sharing news because they might accidentally make a mistake. And on the other hand, some people are overconfident. They think that, oh, well, I can tell the difference, but I'm worried about my friends and neighbors because I don't think they can. One of the things that we can do in journalism is really make it clear how we are distinct and help ease that anxiety and kind of take on the role, the mantle that we've long held, which is as the guide, as the kind of the lighthouse that shines light on injustice and helps point people to honest, accurate information.
As journalists, we know we are fallible, right? And how much does media malaise contribute to this feeling? I mean, how much is the news industry to blame for all this?
How much are we to blame? That's a great point, and I'm glad to hear you ask that question because we should be asking that all the time as journalists. So there's a couple, maybe three ways that I see it. One is that as we were moving more and more into digital media, we lost sight a bit of our audiences. We became part of that disconnect between people and the news that they rely on. It's easier not to trust something if you don't have a relationship with them. And so we haven't been very good about reaching out to the public, engaging with them, listening to them, incorporating all different perspectives and stories, and really on a day-to-day basis engaging with the public. The second piece is corrections. So you mentioned we're fallible. Well, we do make mistakes. So one of the things that we asked participating news organizations to do was to not only have an ethics policy, but to show corrections on their pages, because that's part of building a relationship. It's about being honest about your mistakes. And it also shows that you care about accuracy. The third is if we think about what is causing some of the distrust overall in society and the hyper-partisanship and the, sort of the anger that people feel toward one another, it's because they don't understand one another and because they don't feel heard. And that is a really important role of the news media, is to not only tell the story of the powerful, the wealthy, the business people, and the government, but the people all across the rest of the spectrum.
What has been done so far? I mean, not only to improve trust, but also to fight disinformation, because these two seem to go hand in hand, right? Trust in news media, trust in good information. and disinformation.
When we're, for example, not telling this whole story of society, that gives an opening for misinformation to come in and to play upon stereotypes and to play upon fears. The actions that the social media platforms have taken recently, and also search, have helped. So when you have big public voices that are trying to incite hate or just pushing out misinformation, then it kind of creates a conversation around that. And if you're able to take accounts down from people who are doing that or who are actively spreading misinformation, then it helps create a cleaner environment. At the same time, that's not the whole solution, because the misinformation is out there. It's still getting traded on WhatsApp or shared on WhatsApp. It's getting shared in other places that are much more hidden from moderators' views. And so they can be building an audience that we're not aware of. I think I have a lot of optimism. In some ways, there's a lot of potential for us to kind of reclaim the public square, but we also need to keep our eye on these other spaces.
You have mentioned so far the online environments, social media. So I guess it's safe to say that a lot of this goes through big tech companies, right? They are under a lot of scrutiny right now, not only due to misinformation or disinformation campaigns rolling around them, but antitrust processes in the US and Europe. How much are they to blame in this whole situation, and how much is their responsibility to try to fix it?
Well, they play an important role, and these big technology companies have a lot of power. They are most news is now distributed through these big companies, through their platforms, whether it be social media, search, or services like WhatsApp. I would say the technology companies have the most influence right now. And so, yes, they do need to act, and they have acted. There's much more that needs to be done. They've been doing a lot of work to try to understand what's going on and find ways to address it. From a policy point of view, we haven't seen enough. So, for example, that some of the recent actions of the last few weeks, where they cut off the voices of that were perpetuating falsehoods, some work around that should have been done earlier, because what happened is that it was too late. So much has already been said that there's this whole belief system that has arisen. But that's not to say that more can't be done. All I'm saying is that there has been some good work in the right direction. And so that needs to be, we can't let up. We have to continue, or they have to continue working in those arenas, and we have to continue to pressure them to do so.
Thinking about what has just happened in the USA with Donald Trump, to say the least, questioning the election results, here in Brazil, we see our president mimicking his behavior in many ways, and in that front in particular. So how should media and society behave towards that, thinking that the same thing might happen here in 2 years?
First of all, one of the reasons that the election of our former president surprised us was because journalists weren't covering all of society. We weren't doing a good job really understanding the views and the fears of people in the middle of our country. So people who were mostly white, rural, and also hit very hard economically by economic changes. We also didn't do a good job, as I alluded to earlier, covering Latinos, African Americans, Asians in our country. And so there was kind of this separation of voices. And the people who had the biggest voice were the white, middle to upper class elite. So that creates an opportunity for someone to come in and create a lot of misinformation, or to build a story based on misinformation or unfounded and baseless claims over time, I think what we need to do collectively in Brazil, in the United States, elsewhere, is think about, well, what is causing this political divide that is separating us, that's causing people to just stop listening to one another, stop even acknowledging certain shared facts. And again, I think it points to a lack of awareness of one another, a failure to listen to one another, and maybe a strong discouragement regarding the way society is heading. So there are some of the solutions are kind of going back to the fundamentals of journalism, which is really getting out there and covering all of society, shining a light on injustice, and a new area, doing more around helping point people to solutions. What kind of environment have we created that allows a claim like that to be made? And then with the election and claims of fraud, there were a couple of things that we, and maybe all the way through leading up to that we did. One was giving oxygen to those claims. We gave a lot of, airtime, print space to lifting up concerns that had no basis. So I would have put, if I were the editor, of all the newspapers in the United States, I would have, de-emphasized that, or at least provided a much stronger counterbalance. As journalists, we have to be careful about that, about not allowing these just dramatic claims to take over the narrative. And then also educate people about the actual process. And then the third piece is this piece that we have very little control over. It is the distribution. I get a lot of very conservative news outlets and sometimes opinion that's not differentiated from news. And so if that were my only source of news, I can see why people would get confused.